No war happens because of a single motive, but rather a coincidence of multiple interests at the same time, along with the opportunity to justify the war along moral lines to those outside those interests. In this video, I'm ranking every explanation for why the US attacked Iran on a tier list, ranking them from seriously lacking to very plausible. Preventing nuclear development. Weapons of mass destruction is an old and abused excuse for war. But is there any merit to the claim that Iran was developing a nuclear bomb? Both the International Atomic Energy Agency and US intelligence agree that any evidence that Iran is nuclear capable is circumstantial. Not impossible, but no hard evidence. Still, it's definitely in Iran's interest to be nuclear capable, and I strongly doubt that they wouldn't be able to if they weren't trying to avoid international backlash. My bigger issue with this argument is, why does it matter? It's not 1960 anymore. Attempts to contain nuclear technology have failed. Tons of non-US aligned nations have them, including places like North Korea. Yet the US doesn't automatically attack every nuclear near-capable rogue nation. Only some. Therefore, nuclear capability is not by itself enough to justify US action. At best, it's the combination of nuclear capability and another factor. So even if this one is true, we still have to look at other motives. Minor tier. Iranian missiles threaten US allies. It's true, Iran's missile capabilities threaten US-aligned nations. But, same issue as the nuclear argument, Iran is far from being the only nation that can threaten US allies. An argument can be made that they are more likely than other rogue states to actually follow through with the threat, which is arguably fair, especially in combination with the nuclear argument. But then we have to ask, why are they hostile to US allies in the first place? Why is the US even allied with those nations? If we want to know the actual reason behind this war, we have to move on from what weapons Iran could use in a potential war and instead go into deeper motivations. Insufficient tier. Distraction from domestic issues. This theory argues that politicians in the US and US allies are suffering extraordinary scrutiny and are using a war to distract the population. And it's true, a lot of powerful people are under scrutiny, especially after the most recent revelations of the Epstein files. Using warfare as a means to distract your population and rally people around a common cause is a consistent and effective tactic throughout history. But the issue is, a random war in the middle of a faraway desert doesn't affect enough people to be sufficient. No one has forgotten the Epstein files just because of the Iran war. Trump's approval ratings will not meaningfully go up because of this war, and could in fact go down if things don't go awry. And he can't run for re-election anyway. I'm putting this in the irrelevant tier. Leverage over China's oil supply. The US recognizes China as a strategic rival. Therefore, if the US has been moving to gain control over China's international oil suppliers, that would be a sound strategy. China primarily imports oil from Middle Eastern suppliers, which, with the exception of Iran, is completely under the US sphere. If Iranian oil also comes under US control, that's leverage of about half of total Chinese imports. Not only that, previous military actions such as attacking Venezuela, which has the world's largest oil reserves, takes out another possible Chinese supplier. The only major suppliers not under US influence are Russia, Kazakhstan, Brazil, and Malaysia. Russia and Kazakhstan are out of US reach, but Brazil and Malaysia could easily be blockaded or pressured into not supplying. The overland suppliers would not be able to provide for both their own needs and China's needs over a prolonged conflict. They might not even want to. And this strategy has precedent. The US did the same thing with Japan before World War II. This is definitely a contributing factor. Major or minor is up for debate, but given the continuous pattern, I'm willing to put it in major tier. Petrodollar. This theory is one based on the idea that part of the value of the US dollar, which hasn't been officially backed by anything since they dropped the gold standard, is de facto oil. This argument comes from the fact that US-aligned nations are only permitted to sell oil in USD, and that when other nations attempted to sell oil in another currency, like Iran is doing through shadow trades, Uncle Sam suddenly decides they need another dose of democracy if they're able. A lot of people dismiss the petrodollar as a conspiracy theory, but from a financial point of view, the petrodollar actually makes a lot of sense. The US is unable to fund its massive budget through taxes. It relies on bonds and printing money. But if you print money out of thin air, it loses value. But if you force everyone to use it to get an essential resource, then you can maintain its value. This is unlikely to be the only factor in attacking Iran, but it's certainly aligned with US interests. At minimum, minor tier, and not higher only because of an abundance of caution. Military-industrial complex. This theory argues that there is a deeply corrupt relationship between American weapons manufacturers and the US government, which lobbies US politicians into conflicts to drive up and justify arms sales. I don't deny that this is undoubtedly possible, and there's always lobbying for the US to get into wars. But to answer why the US attacked Iran in particular rather than another nation, it's not enough. I understand arguments for minor tier, like the idea that Iran was the next available target, but I'm putting it in insufficient. Security and global trade routes. This theory argues that Iran's actions in financing and supplying terror groups have been a constant thorn in the US's side, especially when Iran financed groups like the Houthis, which went out their way to attack American trade convoys and threaten vital trade routes like the Red Sea. The constant pressure that these proxies applied, not only on the US but also on US allies, might not be the main reason for war, but it is at least a definite contributor. Without Iran, these groups will become far less able to conduct hostile operations, major tier, to defend Christians.
You serious?
This theory argues that the US acted to protect Christians and other groups which are persecuted by the Iranian regime. I don't find this argument compelling. Christians and other groups have been brutally persecuted in many different nations around the world for decades, and the US hasn't even bothered to sanction them half the time. Not only that, there's no mention of wanting to defend Christians or other minorities in any of the official statements on why the war is happening, rather opting to focus on Iran's nuclear capabilities. At best, we have a single tweet referencing the possibility for Iranian Christians to free themselves. Irrelevant here. This is nothing more than post hoc rationalizing, because we all know there's only one group of people, only one nation that the US sacrifices blood and treasure for, with no expectation of return. And it's not Christians, it's not even Americans, it's Israel. That concludes the tier list. If there are any other theories you would like to see discussed, please share them in the comments below.